Be me. 11 years old. Visiting Grandpa in Belarus near the border. He used to seclude himself from time to time in a shack, which was in a very wooded area. Anyways, parents leave me and Gramps alone for the week. We do fun stuff like fishing and mushroom picking. 3 days go by. Suddenly while we're out in the forest we find strange marks on a tree. They look as if someone burnt them into the trees. Gramps starts panicking and we hurry home. I ask him what's wrong. He tells me,
"That is marked for bears."
I'm a dumb kid so I believed him. As time goes by he starts to become more tense. Normally he likes to joke around a lot and complain about the government. Now he's dead silent and is staring out the window. When evening comes a faint glow is visible in the forest. Grandpa starts flipping his shit and quickly calls my parents. Asks them if they're coming back anytime soon. They say no. He sighs in relief, but gives me a worried look. They chat for a bit. But the calls cut short when we hear the sound of collapsing trees. Gramps says goodbye and hangs up. Now I'm starting to feel like something's wrong. I asked Gramps what's wrong.
"Oh, nothing, Anon. It's just probably the bear breaking branches."
The sounds continue through the evening. One bump after another the sound gets closer. Gramps goes up the attic. He brings with him a fire extinguisher. Why do you need that? I ask. Now he stops bullshitting and tells me,
"There is something very dangerous here and I need you to stay inside at all costs."
I say okay and we keep watching the outside. Nothing happens for a few hours and I fall asleep. I'm woken up by the smell of smoke. I get up and look at Grandpa. He's sweating bullets. I look outside the window and there it is. A figure completely enveloped by fire. It had deer horns. The face was completely obscured by a veil of smoke and yellow eyes poked through it. Gramps notified me to not even dare walk a centimeter out of the house. It walked around the premise. Every now and then it would touch a tree. Surprisingly the trees it touched wouldn't be set on fire. In fact, nothing would, not the trees, not the grass, it didn't even leave a trace on the ground. It then stood next to one of the trees and touched it with both hands. In a matter of seconds the tree was set ablaze and crumbled. The sound it made sounded like the splintering sound a tree makes while falling combined with a loud pop. After inspecting some of the trees, the flame, as I will now call it, started to get closer to the house. Gramps turned off all of the lights and told me to stay as quiet as possible. As it got closer I could make out more of the details. The strangest thing about the flame was that it had both male and female genitalia. I reacted with an uck and Gramps instantly sushed me. The flame started burning some of the flowers in Gramps' garden. After a while it turned around and left. The night went by and nothing really happened apart from the tree sounds. Most of the week Gramps and me stayed inside. But when I got outside I instantly went to check on the trees. Just like I thought, all of the trees had the symbol from before scorched into them. At points the flame would pass by the property. Every time it happened Gramps would hug the fire extinguisher like it was the most important thing in his life. 3 days later, the flame's escapade seemed to end. After that my grandpa told me to never speak about this event. But at a New Year's party, a year after Grandpa's death, I told my family about the flame. They shrugged it off as me and Gramps being high on some shroom. Okay, so this one is gonna tell about why Gramps was so freaked out. Be him. 1992. He's originally from Belarus and had a bunch of property there, but stupid Soviet shenanigans kept him in Lithuania. He gets some of his property back and moves there. Forgot to mention that Grandma broke up with him back in '86, caused Soviet shenanigans. So one day he decides to go hunting. He's walking around looking for tracks and the usual. And he spots the symbol. At first he thinks this is some ranger symbol. This is back in the '90s, so Gramps doesn't give two shits about a license, but he'd rather not fuck with rangers. He's pissed and is hiking back home. He's halfway into the trip and spots the symbol. Now Gramps might be old, but he's definitely not senile. He decides to start following the symbols. On the way he finds piles of ashes, the burnt trees. Suddenly he smells smoke. Also forgot to mention that the burnt trees don't smell, as I said the trees get literally flash scorched. So he keeps going and notices the light. And eventually he comes across the flame. It's sitting in this creek and is dipping its legs in the pond. The water doesn't boil. Its feet though are extinguished. Gramps gets it together and calls out,
"Do you need help?"
The flame looks at him. He described a bright flash coming from the flame's forehead which blinded him. He still has damage from the flash. Gramps goes home, but keeps an eye out for anything weird. Gramps thinks that he might be losing it and thinks about how much his meds are going to cost. Gramps is back home and enjoys some good old borscht on his hammock. Then he smells smoke. The flame comes out of the forest and start burning random trees. Gramps shits himself and runs back inside. He's watching the flame and notices that she doesn't set anything on fire. Gramps has this thing where if you tell him something he'll always doubt you. Naturally he thought that the flame is just some dude in a costume. I asked him how he could have thought of that. He told me that back then folk thought that the Americans literally had the technology to create shit like holograms. So he takes a long stick, walks up to the flame, and pokes it. The stick is instantly engulfed in flames. The flame turns around. It's fucking pissed. It shoots fire at Gramps. Luckily Gramps had a pond in his property. He jumps in it and puts himself out. The flame jumps in after him. It grabs him by the leg. He has military-grade boots on. The flame's grip starts melting the boot. Gramps manages to slip out. He gets out of the pond, books it home and locks himself in the basement. The flame tries to chase after, but it's not a good swimmer and water seems to slow it down. The flame eventually fucks off. Gramps comes out of basement. The pond is completely evaporated and his lawn is charred. Gramps is scared shitless. Calls the cops. Cops call him a retard. Calls my mom. Mom can't do anything. Calls my uncle. Uncle is very close to Gramps, tells him he'll be there in 2 hours. Uncle comes and asks Gramps what's wrong. Gramps explains. Uncle believes him and gets the fuck out. Gramps comes back in '96. He goes exploring. No symbols, no charred trees, no signs of the flame. Gramps is relieved. He sets himself back up. He thought it was a hallucination. Has lived there ever since. It's 1999. So he's living life. Being Gramps. And then boom. It hits him like a brick. Smell smoke. Nopes and goes to basement. The flame goes away. No property damage aside from a few burned flowers. He's asleep, but woken up by smoke. The smoke stench is really bad, like sulfur mixed with alcohol. He thinks about bolting it to the basement, but notices that the flame isn't doing anything. The flame goes away, he goes to sleep. He's cooking himself some lunch. Smell comes back and so does the flame. He stares at the flame and notices the genitalia. Mutters what the fuck to himself. The flame notices him and uses the same forehead flash as before. Gramps realizes that the flame in a sense is completely harmless. So every time Gramps smells smoke he goes inside and watches. It becomes routine. One night the flame met with a wolf. The wolf was visibly scared, but didn't move. The flame put her hands on the wolf and he lit up like a Christmas tree. After that the wolf seemed to become more energetic and ran off into the forest. Another time he saw the flame investigating a tomato. Gramps had started a little farm and planted tomatoes. The flame was completely bewildered by them. Later the same happened with a plum tree he planted. Gramps wanted to see how it'd react to bananas so he left one outside. The flame inspected it for a second and charred it. It actually does that with all fruits and vegetables, but only if they've been picked. Gramps says the flame is completely harmless if unprovoked. Gramps says that he respects the flame and says it's not the only one like it. He says it's part of some cycle and we as humans don't have the right to disturb nature, so that's why it acts negatively towards us. He goes on long rants about religion and spiritualism, but they mostly go nowhere and after he starts going in circles. Okay, one more post. I don't know if you guys care or if I should stop. This one won't be about the flame, but it's a story I want to tell cause it's the first time Gramps encountered the paranormal. B 1950s. Stalin era. Gramps is super old and doesn't have documents so no one knows his real age. But he was 10 to 14 years old when he was sent to a labor camp. Secret police arrest his parents. Gramps actually doesn't remember his parents nor why they got arrested. They get on the train. He compares the conditions on the train to a ship for slaves from the 16th century. Everyone close together. Lightly clothed especially for the Russian tundra. Had to piss through a tiny hole in the wall. They get to Gulag. It's even worse. Even though he's so young he's forced to work. 2 months go by. Gramps' dad dies and his mom disappears, probably dead too. Gramps got beat up by guards 2 weeks ago. His wounds aren't healing, he's on the brink of death. Train stops by and lets out more slaves. This dude from Uzbekistan called Yeshnab is locked up in the Gulag. He's way older than Gramps, but they somehow get along. Yeshnab notices that Gramps is fucking dying and hands him a bag. Bag is full of some gelatinous material. It covers his wounds and solidifies into skin. He asks Yeshnab how he got it. Yeshnab tells him his own story. B. Yeshnab. Also 1950s. Yeshnab gets pissed at a Soviet official and tells him to go fuck himself. Next day secret police takes him to the Polar Express. Yeshnob is fucking broken by the conditions of the train. It even rekindled his belief in Islam. He spends whole days praying. Then he hears yelling and the train stops. The roof of the train ripped off and the train is thrown on its side. Everybody runs. Yeshnob glances back. He sees a blue humanoid with rings surrounding him. Yeshnob calls it, I shit you not, Lord of the Rings. His moment of joy is cut short though. The Soviets gun down the creature and it falls to the ground. Yeshnob without even thinking goes to the aid of the creature. Yeshnob starts to cry. He describes the death of this creature to be the most sorrowful moment of his life. Before it dies, it gives him 3 bags full of gel. He is forced to go back to train and most of escapees quickly get caught. The rest of the train ride was horrible, but better now that Yeshnob had the gel. Then he makes it to the gulag. Gramps and Yeshnob become friends and start thriving in the gulag with the help of the gel. Yeshnob told him that praying is what saved him, so Gramps goes hardcore Christian. Spends hours praying to God and cursing Stalin. Few months later Stalin finally croaks. De-Stalinization begins. Both Yeshnob and Gramps get saved and taken to Belarus. Yeshnob died in '65 from cancer. First time I saw Gramps cry was when he told me that. Later he got moved to Lithuania due to some military bullshit. He told me that he honestly believes that Stalin could have lived another 20 years. He thinks that it was divine intervention that killed him. And Yeshnob's story is also the reason why Gramps doesn't want anyone to know about the flame. He thinks that if anyone found out, it'd be gunned in a matter of days. Okay, so this is the second encounter Gramps had with the flame. There were 5 in total that he told me about. And one that I'll talk about later. B. Gramps. 2001. He goes hunting. Slavic man is hungry so he must eat. He hunts himself a pretty big deer. The deer genuinely is abnormally large and healthy. He then starts looking at the trees.
For fuck's sake.
It's of course the flame symbol. Not wanting to encounter the flame while it's out and about, he hurries it back home. He's around 9 km away from his home when he smells smoke. He doesn't want to have to leave his catch behind, so he looks around for where the flame might be. He searches the whole area, but cannot discern where it might be. So he decides to just wing it and go. Then he hears a chirp. And then more chirps. And then a whole chorus of chirps. Looking up he sees the flame sitting atop a tree, surrounded by hundreds of birds. The flame notices Gramps and starts chasing him. Gramps is one strong dude, he literally thrived in a gulag, so he tries to run away with the deer. While running he trips and thinks to himself,
fuck the deer.
He pulls out a hunting knife and gets ready for the worst. The flame walks up to the dead deer and incinerates it. Another tangent. When I say the flame charred something, I mean more as in disintegration or instant incineration. The flame then looks at Gramps, does the forehead flash and disappears. Gramps thinks God told the flame not to kill him. He's still super Catholic and prays to Jesus every day. Third encounter. B. Gramps. 2005. Yada yada. Gramps is at home gutting a carp. Hears tree noises. Gramps gets an idea. What if I put the Bible in the field? So the flame comes and completely ignores the Bible. Days go by and its interest is finally piqued. So the flame picks up the book. Fiddles with it for a bit. And then throws it away and walks off. Gramps was kind of pissed, but calmed down once he thought about it for a bit. The flame probably can't read. Later Gramps went to a well to get some water. Gramps found the flame sitting on an old stone slab. It was surrounded by all kinds of critters. Gramps watched as she made some of the animals glow from time to time. He sat and watched the flame for around 4 hours. He didn't even realize how long it had been. Until a bear came to the flame with a broken limb. The flame held it for a while and it seemed to go back to normal. Gramps though couldn't stay along for longer. The bear managed to catch his scent, so he legitimately had to run for his life. When Gramps ran back home he peered through the window. Through the tree line he saw the flame was walking alongside the bear. Fourth encounter. Creepiest one yet. B. Gramps. 2007. Gramps is out fishing. While coming home he spots footprints. Boot prints. Gramps was really surprised. He never had any visitors that weren't family. He hikes around and actually spots 2 dudes out in the wilderness. He gets to chatting. These dudes are sketchy as all hell. They give of almost KGB level vibes. Then they ask Gramps,
"What do you think about Lukashenko?"
This isn't Gramps' first rodeo with the secret police. He tells them that he's fine and yada yada. Gramps decides it's time to gut the pike he caught and goes away. His new neighbors start following him and gradually become more passive-aggressive. Eventually they drop the act and just ask for an insane bribe. Gramps tells them they're crazy. The two dudes stop and leave him alone. That night Gramps is knitting in the evening when he hears footsteps outside. And then talking. He calls up my uncle and tells him to get the cops. Gramps takes his hunting rifle and combat knife and hides in the basement. Tweedledee and Tweedledum break into the house. They wreck the place and steal all of Gramps' money. They start looking for Gramps, but assume he's out in the woods. Eventually Uncle comes with police force. Gramps tells them what happened and search is conducted. Eventually they find Gramps' affectionate neighbors. Turns out they plan to dump Gramps' body in the lake. Seems the literal pagan goddess isn't even the scariest thing in that forest. Fifth encounter. Be Gramps. 2013. Gramps is with Uncle. They're hunting boars. Gramps and Uncle are chatting. Then rustling. They found a boar. They take their catch to Uncle's car, then go back to hunting. This continues 3 times until symbols. Uncle asks what they are. Gramps just starts groaning and tells him to go. Smoke smell. Uncle starts thinking that the forest is burning. Gramps calms him down and tells him to do everything he says. Uncle agrees. While they're past a cliff they spot the light. Gramps tells Uncle to shut his eyes and not run, no matter what. Dealing with the flame has become so routine for Gramps that he now waves to it. Every time he does it the flame hisses at him. Uncle and Gramps get forehead flashed a few times and then the flame just kind of fucks off. While they're making their way back they feel the smoke again. It turns out Gramps had become a bit too cocky with the flame. He thought it got so pissed, it started a fire. But that was not the case. As Gramps navigated around the flames he looked up. He saw the flame up on a tree. It looked straight at him. And it's as if her eyes could portray all of its emotions at once. Gramps described it as pure sorrow and hopelessness. The flame most likely had no way to put out the fire. So it sat there observing the destruction. Gramps got real quiet after that one. He said that when he looked into its eyes it felt like he was in the flame's shoes not for a split second, but a century. He knew that something else caused the fire. Okay, so sixth story. It doesn't come for Gramps, but my uncle. Gramps died in 2017. Be him. 2015. As I said, Gramps is slowly becoming more used to the manifestations of the flame. But one day he goes by and does his usual, hello.
Hello.
It talked, it fucking spoke to Gramps. Gramps became as white as a sheet of paper. This genuinely put fear into him. He fell onto the floor and said, "You talk?" It nodded. From this Gramps actually had a stroke. He managed to get to a hospital and miraculously survived. After this, he couldn't stop thinking about the flame. And as soon as he came back to the forest, he called up Uncle. Gramps told him, "If I don't come back by midnight, arrange a closed casket funeral." Of course he came back and with quite the tale. He finds the flame. Usual hello, the flame responds. "What is your name?"
Name?
Who are you?
Me? I'm Azarim.
Apparently her name was something akin to Azarim or something. Uncle couldn't remember it well and Gramps pronounced it differently like 5 times. "Hello, Azarim."
Who are you?
I'm Gramps.
She spoke almost like a child or just had a poor grasp on Russian.
Where are you from?
Home of tree, home of me.
Why do you burn things?
I burn stink.
What is stink?
I don't know.
She starts walking away.
Wait.
Come.
She leads Gramps to a heavily forested area. Gramps thought he was gonna die there. It pointed to a neat collection of rocks and slabs.
Us.
What?
They are me.
It then grabbed Gramps and looked into his eyes. He felt sorrow, longing, regret, rage. These were graves.
How many?
What?
He repeated the question, but the flame seemed to not understand its meaning. Gramps then points at the graves and counted with his fingers in front of the flame. She showed him her hand.
Us.
There were 5 of them. Now I'm guessing it's just one. It slumped over and sobbed. Gramps wasn't the right kind for this, but he tried to cheer it up with sweets. He always carries sweets in his pocket. She looks at it, pokes it and continues sobbing. Gramps sits next to it and starts to sing a song. A dumb song that he made up with Yeshnob. It's a song about fucking the guards' moms and Stalin sucking dick in hell. I've heard before, just as stupid as you think. The flame tries to imitate him, of course her poor grasp of Russian didn't let her. They sing for about 6 minutes.
You are Gramps? Yes?
Yes.
Are you sibling too?
Yes.
They hug. I remember Gramps still had scars from that hug. Gramps came back around 8 p.m. Every visit we made we'd have to wait for him until the evening, because he started to hike more. Once he didn't even come back, so we called the cops, but later found him dead in his bed. I visited the property a few times, but never found the flame. I did find a crude grave near his door. I have an unrelated one, if you want to see it just ask. But yeah, I'm not gonna go back anymore. The land got bought up by someone and I'm leaving the shithole that is Eastern Europe soon.
There any folklore about this? I know Baltic countries were some of the last in Europe to convert to Christianity, and you said this was Lithuania, correct?
Holy shit, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. Pick related is the exact symbol that flame was burning into trees. ATL East, I think so. Symbol represents the god of life and birth Lima. I'm still gonna call it the flame though.
Your grandpa have any theories as to why what appeared to be a pagan spirit would use a Christian cross as their symbol?
Well, the symbol was probably in use before Christianity was even a thing, but Grandpa had a theory. He thinks that things like the Flame and Lord of the Rings are just different kinds of humans and that everything about them can be explained by science if someone invested the time. He thought that before humans came to Europe, it was inhabited by these creatures. I personally think that at the start humans revered them as gods, but maybe they just got smarter and killed all of them, maybe not even for Christianity's sake, just selfishness or fear.
Sounds like a Miskeenese/Miskeen, but it's the first time hearing about them being engulfed in flames. And from your story, the entity was near Lithuanian/Belarusian border, correct?
To be more specific, our family lives in Lithuania. He lives in Belarus. We have to cross a border just to meet him. Gramps lives somewhere in between 50 to 100 kilometers from the border. There are no other homes in a 10-kilometer radius from Gramps.
Fellow Lithuanian then. Have you ever thought about searching of such entities yourself?
Apart from the flame, nothing paranormal happens to me. As I said, after Gramps' death I visited the property, but it never showed up.